Mr. Ielpi.
Good morning. Before I start, let me say two things. One, I'm not used to reading. I'd rather talk candidly, but I'm going to have to read for time. And two, some of the things I'm going to say are going to be sensitive to some of the families that might be listening, so I'd like to let them know ahead of time. I come to you today as an ambassador for the dead, and on behalf of the many others who toiled at Ground Zero to recover the victims of the terrorist attack. My son Jonathan, a member of Squad Company 288 of the New York City Fire Department, was killed in the South Tower. I'm a retired firefighter and a grieving father. I bring no political agenda to this hearing. The only baggage I bear is a broken heart and a resolve that the terrible events of September 11th not be repeated. 10 minutes is a very short time to summarize even one day of the horror and loss that filled Ground Zero. It is far too short to describe 9 months of picking through rubble and debris, to find torsos, fingers, arms, bones, and legs. Far too short to convey 1 year and 7 months of missing my son and looking into the sorrowful eyes of his mother, his siblings, his wife, his children. I cannot summarize an eternity. I can only share with you some of the images of Ground Zero that I will carry with me forever. That morning when I arrived at the Trade Center site, I got there about within a half an hour after the South Tower had come down. I saw my first fatality, a New York City firefighter laying by his apparatus. I continued down the block. I got down to West and Vesey, where the walkway spanned the West Side Highway. It had collapsed onto a number of fire vehicles. We were able to crawl underneath of these vehicles and start a search. We were able to turn off some of the engines that were still running. All of the souls that ran underneath of this walkway to find shelter were dead. My primary reason, of course, was to find my son. My ultimate reason was to find my son. I continued searching with a lot of my friends that I had met. I'd been a firefighter for some 26 years, and I know a lot of people on the job. The searching continued in and out of voids, under and around spaces, over and above, only to find death. We found no life. After the first bunch of hours at the site, for the remainder of those 9 months, we were to find nobody alive. We were only going to find death. I continued that day in searching. It became quite obvious as we progressed that it was going to be a difficult day for my family. The following days were much the same. I spent the better part of 9 months at that site searching. I met a lot of wonderful people that came from across this country to assist us. I cannot begin to tell you how wonderful it was to see and talk and listen to these people. These were men and women that came to serve us food, to listen to us, to cry with us, to not say anything to us. We worked with operating engineers, we worked with carpenters, we worked with iron workers. We worked with police, we worked with fire. I worked with a number of fathers who came to look for their sons. I brought a picture along with me that I'll leave here. Many of these fathers that came did not find their sons. On December 11th, 3 months to the day, I had left the site. I was home. It was about 11:30 at night. I got a phone call. It was Paul Ferro, who was the deputy chief at the site. He was working the night tour. When I heard his voice, I knew what it was. Paul said, "Lee, we have your son." I said, "Okay, Paul, I'll be right there." I got my son, Brendan, who is also a firefighter. We hopped in a car. We had a fire vehicle at our disposal. We head back to the site. At about 1:30 in the morning, my son Brendan and I start our descent down into the site. This is within the slurry wall area, bathtub otherwise known as. About 35 to 40 feet below level. Over on the side was a Stokes basket, and my son was in it. He was covered with an American flag. Paul Farrow came over to me and he put his hands on my shoulder and said, "Lee, he's all there." That meant something to me, and I'll explain it later. I went over to my son, I knelt down, I spoke to him. I still had to feel him from head to toe to satisfy my own curiosity. Then, with the help of my son Brendan and some of the men from Squad 288, we picked up my son and we carried him up the hill. We placed him in an ambulance, and my son Brendan and I rode with him to the morgue. We were able to bring home our son in one piece, and we put him to bed at home where he belonged. We have a chart here, if I could just show it for a second. The work that continued at the site went on for almost 9 months. The New York City Fire Department used the GPS system to mark every remain that was found. This map, you can see the vast majority of remains. Those are the towers. Those towers sit within the slurry wall area. That area goes down 6 stories deep. Every dot there represents a body part. It cannot represent all of them because we went from grade level down to 6 stories below. So one dot may represent 5, 10, 15, 20 body parts. Thank you. I will leave that with you also. We meet with I belong to the Coalition of 9/11 Families. We meet with the medical examiner's office every 3 weeks. I'll give you just a couple of quick figures here. Between Shanksville, of course, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon, we know that some 3,000 lives were taken that day. At the World Trade Center site, 2,792 souls were murdered that day. 19,934 body parts were retrieved in 9 months. To date, 6,438 of those remains have been identified. To date, 13,447 of those remains still are unidentified and remain at the medical examiner's office. 1,477 families have been notified that their loved ones were found. 1,312 have not. Out of 2,792 souls lost at the World Trade Center, there were only 292 whole bodies. There will never be any more than 292 whole bodies. My son was one of those whole bodies. One night, after all of the recovery work was over, I was at the site, 6 stories below grade, at bedrock, for a small tribute. There were many of them. Afterwards, as I was ready to leave, I realized that no one was working. As I started to walk that long walk to the ramp that led out to street level, a Port Authority cop that I know drove by and said, "Would you like a ride up the hill?" I said, "No, I think I would like to walk." He understood, and he left. I had never been down there when it was this quiet. I walked over to where they found my son. I cannot describe the overwhelming feeling of warmth and sadness as I stood there. And I could hear people talking. It was a very powerful feeling. Now I guess I'm going to try to help you hear those voices too. We cannot change what happened on September 11th, but it must not be forgotten, and it must never happen again. America's guardians failed us on 9/11. You are now the guardians of that legacy, of that horrible day. Each of you personally, not merely as a member of a commission, now bear responsibility to see that the lessons you learn at these hearings are remembered and, more importantly, acted on. I urge you not to fail the past or the future. And I thank you for the time.